Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are watching and listening to Historian Radio's Echoes of the News, and I am Muhammad Hussain Qazi, and these are the previous week's headlines from the past. On the 9th of February 1943, the Guadalcanal campaign concluded. This would be, interestingly, a consecutive 2 weeks in which we have discussed an end to a major campaign in a theater of the Second World War. Our audience would be interested to recognize this fact. But returning to the matter at hand, on the 9th of February, with the conclusion of the Guadalcanal campaign, it showed the Japanese forces were evacuating their former colonies, which they had acquired unlawfully, of course, as far as international law is concerned, as they had used war as a tool of foreign policy. It also turned the tide in the favor of the Allied powers, as this was a major Allied offensive against the Japanese Empire, and so it marked a strategic turning point in the Pacific theater of the Second World War. Moving forward, on the 10th of February, on the subject of endings of famous battles and wars, on the 10th of February 1763, the Treaty of Paris was signed, which ended the 7 Years' War. And in this particular treaty, Britain ended up gaining vast territories in North America and India. Thus, it reshaped global imperial balance and set conditions for the American Revolution to take place several years later. And so the date 10th of February 1763 is not just important in understanding the power balance of imperial powers in Europe, but also in understanding the foundational years of the American Revolution. Moving forward, on the 11th of February in 1929, the Lateran Treaty was signed, an agreement between Italy and the Vatican, which established the Vatican City as an independent state, thus resolving the long-standing Roman question. This would be a significant date in the history of European and Italian politics, and of course, the religious history of the Vatican City. And so, the Vatican City asserting itself as a city-state would be one of the most significant moments in contemporary human history. The Vatican, to this day, remains to be one of the most significant regions and cities in the history and religion of Christianity. Moving forward, on the 12th of February in 1809, Abraham Lincoln was born, one of the most iconic and significant presidents of the United States of America, would be born on this day in Kentucky. The future US president was born during the Civil War, and he is best remembered for preserving the Union and, of course, abolishing slavery with the concept of Emancipation Proclamation. And he would therefore become one of the most studied political figures in modern history. Moving forward, on the 13th of February 1945, we shall make a return to the history of the Second World War when we discuss the bombing of Dresden, one of the biggest air operations carried out by the Allied powers against a German city. The bombing was done to such an extent that residents described the tars of the street melting. While this was a major victory for the Allied powers, the tens of thousands killed, with the city center being devastated, proved the true horrors of the Second World War. And on the 14th of February, while it is Valentine's Day, Roosevelt met King Abdulaziz of Saudi Arabia, the historic meeting aboard USS Quincy, which formed the foundations of American-Saudi strategic partnerships, and this therefore shaped Middle Eastern politics for decades. While this day is best remembered for Valentine's Day, as mentioned in the prior half of this particular headline, it is also important to note that the 14th of February is a significant date in the history of prohibition as well, as it is the anniversary of the Valentine's Day massacre, when Al Capone's men gunned down a rival mob's men in cold blood, therefore showing the true horrors of the Prohibition period and the impact it had on local politics in cities where prohibition had resulted in bootlegging empires being formed. Moving forward, on the 15th of February in 1942, the fall of Singapore took place when British forces surrendered to the forces of Imperial Japan. One of Britain's greatest military defeats would therefore take place on this day. And it altered imperial perceptions across Asia, including in what was then British India and British Malaya. And on that note, we conclude this week's headlines of the day. Well, sorry, I apologize. Headlines of the week. Old habits die hard. And I am Muhammad Hussain Qazi, and these were the previous week's headlines. We shall return to you next Sunday with more headlines from our course of human history. That was it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Good night.